Speaking of reliability, a podcast with good friends talking with you about reliability engineering topics. Welcome to Speaking of Reliability. This is Fred Schinkelberg.
This is Chris Jackson.
Hey, Chris, I got a note the other day, and actually had a short phone call with a friend of mine, basically, that a couple of years ago, kind of at the start of what now is being called the Great Resignation, took another job at another company. I think it was in part a shorter commute, and it looked like a great opportunity, so they jumped. And now a year or so later, they're like, this isn't what I thought it would be, and they feel stuck. We're kind of, the discussion we've all drawn, are we heading into a recession or not? There's news is full of layoffs, even though the job market's really hot and people are getting hired right away. That could change pretty quickly. So they were feeling a bit stuck. And so it was a bit of a discussion about, well, what are you trying to do or not? And I related a story of when I was in the Army, one of the battery commanders in the battalion I was in, just every lieutenant just steered away from this guy. Just nobody wanted to be anywhere near him. And so it was for all kinds of reasons, but he basically pulled no punches and told you what he thought. And most of the time it was criticisms and stuff like that. So it was just not a pleasant experience for junior officers to be around this guy. And I got assigned to him. I was just going to be his XO. And I was like, oh my God. So I went home, had a shot of whiskey, and kind of put my head in my hands, and now what am I going to do? And within about 2 months, it turned out to be the best position I ever had. It was so much fun, and we got along great. And the story goes, there's much more to the story, which best done over a beer. It involved changing my expectations and looking at what can I do in this position, instead of just keep my head down and doing what I'm told, is what can I do to make this job really work and work for me, and that I'm happy with doing, and kind of thing. And I focused on my soldiers, and he appreciated that, and that made it work. And I really enjoyed helping my soldiers, move on with their life and their careers and doing all the stuff they do and being successful at what they did. Because I often felt if they were successful, that would make us successful. And that worked. But it was a different conversation. And outside the military, we're not so involved with each other's lives and all that other good stuff. And so it was more a discussion about, well, what are you trying to do? Or what's the dissatisfaction part of this thing? And I won't get into details of it, but I don't know, Chris, I think you've run into this experience once or twice.
Yeah, I think about this a lot. And when you first mentioned this, I know an article triggered it. The article I thought you were talking about, but you weren't, was another one. I want to say Harvard Business Review. It's a magazine with a picture of a puppet on the front. And I think the topic is, I read it a little bit. I just skimmed it because I didn't have the time to go deeply into it. But it was essentially about how managers don't know what employees of today want. I recall...
Yeah, we talked about this at one time, yeah.
Right, and I recall on a previous podcast when I was teaching a course, one of the people who worked for the company I was teaching, I said at the previous company, when it was the sort of end-of-year CEO roundtable, kumbaya, whatever you want to call that, within a matter of minutes, the old white guys in charge of said organisation openly, complained about how younger generation believe they are entitled to leadership positions from a very early start or young age, and 2, complaining about why so many young people are leaving their organisation to create startups and do their own wonderful things, and how do we keep those people in our organisation? You just both asked and answered the question in the same conversation. But I have a theory that, if you're involved in a services industry, if you are essentially doing the same thing over and over again, if you're not involved in building something, then it's a really good workplace revolves around a caring, wonderfully supportive, empathetic boss who's prepared to discipline you if you're out of line, but prepared to reward you if you do good work. But then there are other organizations, and I'm going to use Apple as an example, because Steve Jobs, who is synonymous with Apple's success, was a jerk. There is no two ways about that. He ascribed to none of the leadership principles that retired generals write about in books. But what Steve Jobs had, and many other visionaries have in those industries where you actually build something, is a vicious focus on an idea that people buy into. And everything else is secondary. Bureaucracy, secondary. Speaking to your boss, having everything go through your boss and not to the subject matter expert, secondary. And there's some organizations, many organizations like that do really well, where the boss appears to be a jerk, but it's the idea that, or the passion, or whatever you want to call it, they have that not many other people have. That means that people want to come up to work every single day. And the reason why is because those people want to build something which is amazing. And if that boss is able to offer an amazing idea they can be part of, that is rewarding to people who build stuff.
It doesn't require the boss is a jerk. That's the message, but it's a clear picture of what you're trying to do. But I've worked with just brilliant people that were, just made you want to put in the extra effort and do the great job, because they knew they got you, they had your back,
Yep.
But it was, the idea is that when that's in disconnect, and you in the discussion, and also it ended up being another article I saw today, which prompted me to remember that discussion as an idea for this episode, was that, well, I don't really think I can leave. I don't want to, be in a job for less than a year and then quit. And I need to try. It was kind of the discussion. What can I do? And well, let's just use that, let's say it's the angry old white guy boss that wants the bureaucracy to be a certain way or whatever. And because I've had that experience, and I suspect you have too. Well, what can you do? What are the actual tangible options you have as a, mid-level reliability engineer with some working on a handful of different programs? And what is it that you can actually do to get job satisfaction and not be so in the feeling of being stuck?
I think the first thing you need to do is define job satisfaction, because what works for you might not work for me or work for somebody else. For example, I have a very low tolerance for bureaucracy that I perceive to be worthless. I know that about myself.
Yep.
I know that no one likes it, but for me, it's like, it's like I'm allergic to it. I break out in hives, and I know that about me. I really do. I think bureaucracy, when done well, is fantastic. But I was talking about this again at the Rams conference most recently. People talking about how we have such a robust reliability process, and we're not getting the results. I say to them, look, if your bureaucracy is complex, then the bureaucracy becomes a product. You feel satisfied once you've ticked all the boxes, once all the reports are in, once all the tests have been run, once all the qualification serials have been completed. That's what success feels like. Whether it works or not in the hands of a customer is almost secondary once you have a really complex process that is just clearly, one idea after another that was put in by a committee who potentially don't even live anymore. I think you know what I'm talking about.
Yeah, I know what you're talking about. But there's also the idea that the process itself of, running this suite of tests or doing this the other thing is not the point. It's reliability is not running a test. That's not the point. It's what is, and I think you say it the best, Chris, is what's the decision? What are you trying to accomplish? What do these people need to know that is an output of what you're doing? It's not that we've finished 75 different tests. It's we provided the essential piece of information that made this product's design actually very good. And work for the customers kind of thing. Or if it's in a factory setting, it's the concept or idea, the focus on the right part of the system so that we improved availability or reduce downtime or improve throughput or whatever. It's what are we trying to accomplish and focusing on that rather than the process itself of saying, all right, we never have enough samples, so we're going to complain that we never have enough samples. Well,
right.
No, you always have enough samples. It's what you do with them.
Yeah. I mean, sorry, you go.
Yeah, no, but it's that kind of thing is that it's, and I learned it early on, is if you stand up and walk around to the side of your desk or office and look at it from another point of view. I mean, physically move to a different position and rethink this problem. What is it that, so if you're in a bureaucracy thing and your boss wants everything to go through you and they take credit for what goes well and you get chastised for anything that goes wrong, but you get no credit, well, what are your options? Create a shadow set of influence that find a mentor that, is in a different group or department, but is a higher level that gets it and is willing to support you. Look for other opportunities. Different bosses may have different opportunities available that fit you. And I'm just brainstorming, but the idea is that, well, you can wallow in your, feeling stuck, or you can start steps in action to actually change it and make a difference. And, tout your own horn. If you do a really good job and that program made launched on time and had a very successful first year and all this other good stuff, make sure people know about it. Make sure that it's visible, that there was this effort that actually made a difference. And, but it's just to sit and complain about it is not healthy for anybody or the organization or your customers. But it's the idea is that recognize that if you're stuck, right? Well, what can you do to get out of it?
I think I agree. A lot of the stuff you were saying sort of agrees with what I feel and how what I want out of a job as well. But I still think you're talking to your own personal motivations, which I mean, and I'm not a challenge, but you go back, I think you have to go back to what it is what does job satisfaction look like for you? So,
yeah. And for some people, they want a decent pay raise. They just want the money. Some want the parking spot, the recognition for what they're doing, right? Some people want to be the employee of the year or the month or whatever that system is about. Others want their ideas to be heard. Others want the satisfaction that they personally did a good job. And it, like you said, it varies all over the map. But being clear of what it is and isn't helps you it's like a root cause analysis. We've got articles on that and podcasts on that. But break it down. What is it that is the friction point that's causing the problem in your setting? And what can you do about it? And
right.
If you really, really are stuck, that means you're in a dungeon chained to the wall. Well, I don't think many of our work environments prosper when they do that to employees. So you have the option to do something about it. And I found that in those occasions when I've run into these, I had one boss that just could not make a decision. And it was like, come on, I want to go to Rams. You say it's a good thing I should go do. We're 2 weeks out for it. I need to book the flights. Otherwise, it'll get way more expensive. I need the approval. Oh, let me think about it. So I went to his boss and said, all right, I'm not getting a decision. And she said, oh, here, sign it, go. Have a good time.
Right.
And he never said a word about it one way or the other, but he still refused to make a decision. And so shortly after that, I petitioned my director to work independently. Here's a project I want to do. I want to start it up myself. And she said, well, you got to have this other guy with you as a balance. He needs to do something like this too. So the two of us started the reliability program and revamping it while we were there, and grew to be about a third to half of the group's workload came from our little effort. But we created our own job. And so eventually she said, you need a manager. So she made us go hire a boss. And so, but it was, but she recognized that we needed some autonomy and she had faith that we would do a good job and make a difference, and we certainly did, and we had a blast doing it. But it was, we saw the opportunity and took it. And yeah, it's risky. Yeah, it could have just fallen apart. But I was, for me, the enjoyment was this basically start my own business kind of thing, even though I was in a corporate setting. But that was thrilling. I was there and all in to make it work.
Right.
Whereas, 6 months earlier, I'm working for this guy that just can't make a decision. I'm like, yeah, this is frustrating. And so always have those feelers out looking for, what can I do that would make a difference, be beneficial to the folks I work with in the company and to the customers we serve, and that I would want to do. And so I went and created that job, basically.
But I think the bit that you're sort of not glossing over, but you're saying, however you want to describe it, you wanted to own, build something, whatever you want to call that.
Right.
And that's what your version of job satisfaction looked like. And you went and made that happen.
Yep.
I'm guessing that you probably wouldn't have hung around if that wasn't going to be afforded to you. Would that be effective?
Oh, no. I just saw all those resistance points as just a challenge. I remember one project that I ran into involved and they sat on the same floor as us. Our group was on one side of the aisleway and they were on the other side. They tended to focus on software projects, and we tended to focus on hardware projects. And we weren't really allowed to talk to each other. And they had different funding models between the two groups. So it was discouraged to actually do anything with them. Write a paper or address a project or do anything else. Unlike the products themselves that we created, were hardware, electronics, and they always had software of one form or another on it. They had to work together. And so I thought this was crazy. And it just so happened that one of the guys that was in the software team and I both were noontime runners. A couple times a week we would meet and go for a run, or and chat about this, that, or the other thing. And that's where I mentioned that project to him. So we decided that instead of going up the channels and trying to get it to work, which we had tried and others had tried in the past and just got shot down because of the complexities of the bureaucracies between the two groups, we said, well, we're just going to go do it. And we had a very successful project together, and the client was ecstatic. And now our two directors had to acknowledge they had to figure out how to work together. We just forced the issue.
Right.
But I had enough freedom to do that.
That's my point, though, is if you were never able to get to that level of, autonomy, whatever you want to call it, owning your own destiny, building something, forcing change, and let's be clear, there are organizations that, in spite of best effort, you're never going to change anything.
That's true.
They exist. Then you have to make that call. But I think it goes back to, again, what does job satisfaction look like? I know people who are, let's just say, senior reliability engineers. They've spent a lot of time, some of them have been consultants, but now you see them, they're sort of in the big corporate machine of certain organizations. And you go, what are you doing here? You know what you do know what you're talking about. You know you're not making change. And they say, well, I'm just getting old. I don't want to travel. I just want the health package or the health benefits. And you go, oh, okay. Now, if that person is genuinely honest about that or has genuinely believes that, then they are satisfied in that job. It would not satisfy the requirements that you put to yourself in the way you described the previous scenario. But that's where I think that everyone just needs to sit down and work out, what do you need to feel satisfied at your job? And you work hard, you rise to challenges. If you have a boss who can't make a decision, try and work around that lunatic. But eventually you will either succeed or go, you know what, it's been real, team, but I'm going to go somewhere else. Yep. And the other thing too is that I think in this generation, I'm not saying anything that you did was not anything less than admirable. It was fantastic, that story you told. But the tolerance that younger people are having for the amount of effort they need to put into invoke change is rapidly decreasing. As in, even if they believe they can enact change, but it's going to take too much of their effort, they're more likely just to go to an organisation which they believe will also be happy to enact that change, but requires less effort on their behalf. And so I think that's a key difference. If it's too hard to make changes, more and more young people are simply going to another organisation, no questions asked, searching for an organisation which is less resistant to change. And that's why you have those old white guys we talked about earlier, who on one hand complain about young people demanding more leadership in their terms, but then also wondering why people are leaving. And people don't necessarily want leadership. They just want to make decisions that matter. That's not leadership. And if your organisation, essentially all the decision making is sort of ring fenced within whatever you call the leadership group, then sure, young people will say, well, I want to be part of leadership if they're the only people who get to make decisions. But if you divest decision making to the lowest levels, then from one perspective, everyone's a leader and you get that job satisfaction. There are organisations who employ young people. This constant whining about millennials and everything else, it's not as if millennials make up more of the unemployment figures. They're finding jobs. It's just they're not finding jobs in your organisation. That's very different. So I don't know. I do think that you really need to work out what it is that what it is that job satisfaction looks like. Another example is a friend of mine who was a single parent, and I knew he could have done a lot more, but he said, you know what, this job here, it's 9 till 4 every single day. There's no working back late. There's no weekend work, and that's exactly what I need because I have a young child with childcare and schooling and everything else. So that person has their own definition of job satisfaction.
Yep.
So you just need to get on top of what it means for you.
Yeah. No, and that's a good part of the discussion we had. I mean, it's also the idea, and my last note on it is that feeling stuck is, to be blunt, is a personal problem. I mean, if you enjoy complaining that you're stuck, well, that's not something. And if you want advice or help, well, the first one is stop self-wallowing kind of thing.
Yep.
Start thinking about, well, what can you actually do to change it? And there's an infinite number of options available. And then as you said, Chris, it starts with, well, what is it that you're looking for? What are you trying to do? And some would say that's Pollyanna. It's I'm looking at the glass half full kind of thing. Well, anything's possible. You just got to start. It's really hard to get across the street if you don't start walking that way, kind of thing. So there's that part of it. But reliability engineering, in my opinion, is a great position to have in any organization because you can work on so many variations and add value in so many different ways and take on projects and solve problems and, rescue the product line and work with suppliers. The range is phenomenal of what we can stick our fingers into. Going about it deliberately can make a huge difference, not only in your job satisfaction, but also in what your impact within an organization, which is probably a subject, a whole nother series of podcasts about how do you make a difference that you want to go do. So but anyway, I was happy to chat for a little bit with a friend of mine and get him, hopefully check back with them in another month or so and see how it's going, if they're making some difference, and or see if they have a new email address. We'll see. But the idea is that, reliability is like any other job. If you're facing a bureaucracy or some situation where you feel stuck, well, we've got options. So let's chat about it. You're not alone. So I'd be happy to do that. If you're listening to this and you've got some ideas of how to help people move on or improve their situation or whatever, or you're stuck, what's the circumstances? I'm sure we didn't cover all of the various ways that could happen. Let us know. Head over to accendoreliability.com/go/SOR, and you can find a couple of ways to get in touch with us there. Chris and I, like the other hosts of the show, are available through LinkedIn or through our About pages on Accendo. Plenty of ways for you to get in touch. As long as I have power and internet, which seems to be improving with the day, so we're in good shape.
Just don't compromise. Work out what you want and fight for it. Just try and make it work. And the other thing is, hope is not a strategy.
Yeah, that's a good one. That should be a bumper sticker. All right, thanks, Chris. Talk to you soon.
Thanks, Fred. Always a pleasure.
Thanks for listening to Speaking of Reliability. We invite you to join the conversation. If you have a question or a topic that you think we should discuss in a future show, please let us know. You can find a comment box below the episode show notes, or just leave a note as part of a review on iTunes.